So, welcome to this series of the Dissidents Podcast. This is where Wink and I talk about things relative to our book. So, for those of you who don't know, Letters in Black and White. This is going to be a really fascinating conversation. So, we've got with us Bill Paine and Tom Miller, who are both related. Great. So, Bill, you are great grandson of Lemuel Haynes, Reverend Lemuel Haynes, and Tom, you are great grandson. And we our book. Give me a little. I'll give you a little bit of a background. Our story, the way Wink and I got together quickly for you, both you, Bill, and Tom, is I had gone to a DEI training that was very disheartening, and the way it talked about Black people in general and white people in general too, it put us in boxes. It really didn't allow for a real human conversation, and I wrote about that, and Wink saw what I wrote. It was published in a magazine, and he wrote me back, and so this is where we started this Letters in Black and White. And as part of that, Wink really got me into ancestry. So before I met Wink, I wasn't into ancestry at all. And his big thing was you need to find out who you're related to across the color line. And that's what I did. And so this is what started the journey alongside with us writing, starting this journey that he had already started out on. And I'll stop here in a second and let him discuss why that's so important to him. But he started out on this journey and he connected to so many people who looked different from him, that he was not expecting in his family line. I also, as we started writing, did the same. And that has been an important part of our journey and an important part of our connection and what we've written about. So with that, Wink, I'm going to pass it over to you before we get to Reverend Lemuel Haynes, because I'd love for you to tell us why this ancestry and this DNA and finding out who your relatives are is so important to you.
Thank you, Jen. My name is Winkfield Twyman, and the fact that my name is Twyman is of some significance. When I was born and when I was a little kid, I grew up on a road called Twyman Road, named after my family. Everyone on Twyman Road was a Twyman. I saw cousins here, uncles there, aunts there, cousins here. And so as I grew older, I wanted to know more about this name, Twyman. Where did it come from? Where did it start? A desire to know more about your ancestry. And so as I came through high school and college and law school, I was sort of frustrated because the earliest I could go back in time was my great grandfather, and that would have been Scott Twyman, who was born a slave in the year 1848, I believe, in Virginia. And so I just assumed I would never know more than that about the Twyman name uh, forever. And then in the 2010s came the miracle of genetic genealogy. And I'm a very persistent guy. I did Ancestry, I did 23andMe, Family Tree, GEDmatch, the whole gamut of things that one could do. And on my birthday, in the year 2016, I discovered a relative who was a descendant of the White Twymans in Virginia. And so that connection, and we had a great conversation when we met for the first time, led me to expand my family tree beyond the earliest known slave all the way back to George Twyman I, who was born in 1661 in Birchington, England. And he came to colonial Virginia in 1677, a teenager, on the ship named Recovery. He landed in Jamaica, Middlesex County, worked as an indentured servant to his master Thomas Lee. And indeed, he seems to be somewhat of an independent-minded ancestor because he ran away and hid in the Virginia woods for up to a month until he decided to return to Mr. Lee. The point being, I felt more complete as a person. And I think there's a great importance to all Americans recognizing they have ancestors across the color line. That's my story, Jen, and I'm sticking with it.
And so today, Bill and Tom, you are both related to Reverend Lemuel Haynes. This man is a powerhouse. I'm first Black ordained minister, first Black man with a master's degree. I mean, we can go on and on and on, but I will stop there and leave that story to you both. Tell us about your ancestor, Reverend Haynes.
Bill, you're the one that uncovered him, so go ahead.
Well, thanks, Tom. I first would want to say this, that I uncovered Tom not that long ago either, because my genealogy search is really focused on another side of the family. And then when I swung back around and started going up the chain, not that far away was this grandmother of Tom's, who was my great grandmother's sister. And so, as people do this, they find ways to get in touch with people, and lo and behold, Tom's a very easy guy to get a hold of, and on top of that, he was responsive. So, I first of all want to say, Tom, thanks for accepting the invite to connect, and because a lot of folks are not always on top of that or interested, and I know for many years my career didn't allow me to do that to the extent that I wanted to, and there's some motivations behind that. But I would say this: after connecting with Tom and starting to explore the tree, additionally, um, Tom's grandmother, and he can tell the story about her, and my great grandmother, neither one of whom we met. They were really pioneers in terms of coming to Chicago from Minnesota. And so the Minnesota connection was through the Haynes connection. And so one thing led to the next, and I thought, okay, I'm going to just look at this family tree again. And there were some handwritten notes, and I looked at the figure of Lemuel Haynes, and so lo and behold, the Google search identified a website host that had tremendous pictures of the family, including our relatives, or not necessarily all lines, but the Lemuel Haynes picture that is so famous in Wikipedia that you sent along yesterday, Wink. And there's a great illustration of that as well. But in a couple books that I'm going to make reference to later. But then I looked at this and I said, wait a second. Now this doesn't correspond, because the picture of Lemuel Haynes shows an African American complexion, not real dark, not real light, but just kind of in the middle. So I thought, I've got to figure out more what's going on. And so there's a ton of information on this website from another second cousin. And I'll give you all these references later if you want to add it to the podcast afterwards. But and it just opened up the whole box, and I was actually overwhelmed. I thought, in a positive way. I was so excited about this finding, and in our family, we always wondered, is there any African American ancestry? Because that's a kind of a question you ask yourself with the coming of age, is, maybe I have some African American or American Black blood in me, but nobody ever said anything. So when I shared that information with Tom, and Tom can jump in here, and as soon as I give him his proper due, he was out outstandingly excited, which for me that meant a lot, because I could now find kind of a partner in exploration, and he's been a great advocate and responded always to the kind of correspondence we've had about this famous person, as Jen mentioned, and so Tom, that's kind of a kickoff.
Well, I'm a big fan of Skip Gates and Finding Your Roots. I just love the program, and when I discovered that Lemuel Haynes was in our ancestry and such an illustrious person in the ancestry, I think perhaps the outstanding ancestor that we have, as opposed to, boring businessmen, lawyers, farmers. This guy was really amazing. And I was so delighted. And I did do an ancestry.com, and it was all, boring Western European English blood, but 1% West African. And I thought, oh, wow, there is a connection. And I happened to have I actually taught the first group of Peace Corps volunteers who went to Ghana, West Africa. I had taught there after college and spent 2 wonderful years teaching in Ghana, in a little town called Dorma Henkro, west of Kumasi near the Ivory Coast, about 5 or 6 miles from the Ivory Coast. So I had this wonderful positive connection with West Africa as a result of that teaching, and so I was just delighted to find Lemuel Haynes in my ancestry, and as I said, I think we're proudest of him, of any of the ancestors, and the fact that he was accepted by the white community at that time, fought in the Revolutionary War, was a Minuteman, and all the other aspects of his career just made me so full of pride.
Wow.
And so
So
for
I think
a lot of people probably don't know who Reverend Haynes is. I mean, that's one of the things that we write about in our book, is a lot of discussion today around race is around like kind of this victim narrative, and Black Lives Matter, etc. So it's really not one of teaching about resilience and Black history in a way that looks at achievement. And so in our book, the second part of our book, we bring out about 5 people that you don't hear about that much. George Boyer Vachon, John Mercer Langston, and really, like, Wink gives me a history lesson, if you will, on the resilience and the history and the of these characters that we don't hear that much about. So for our audience that is not familiar with Reverend Haynes, unfortunately, he is not someone who often makes it into the race discussions these days.
we will change that.
Yes, we're working on changing that. Give an introduction on just who he is, his history.
Bill, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm happy to there's so many sources, but that I have looked at and found that are really so well written. Probably the go-to resource for his background is the piece that was done shortly after his death. Lemuel Haynes died in 1833. He was born in 53. You always have to look at these dates because there's so 80 years is a pretty long life back in those days. But his birth was probably the most talked about event in terms of uniqueness to the times, and but actually, in fact, it probably happened a lot more than we know about, and that is that he was fathered by an African or slave, or a free person. Nobody seems to know who that was, but the mother is purportedly to have been a farmhand. One report is Alice Fitch, and this is all happening in Connecticut. or Massachusetts. I got to get my notes straight.
I got the impression that
Connecticut.
they weren't sure as to the mother, that she may have been from a respected Connecticut family, but
Right, that's the other
ended up
possibility.
blaming it on the maid. So that requires for research.
There's a great chronology. In fact, there's a huge biography, and I'll get back to the intro, but Tom's exactly right. There's speculation that it was something that happened probably more than often because of all of the interrelations that were taking place at all throughout our East Coast of the natural engagements between women and men.
Yeah, but usually the father was white.
and the
Mother
difference
was
being is that
African American.
the difficulty was that there was a baby born who was not white, and so maybe the mother didn't even know at the time that was the case of who the father might have been, or she did, but she was kind of in a bind because she was probably either a real well-respected family or a servant. So nobody seems to know or has put that forward. But I think, Wink, you alluded to, well, maybe the blood test will bring that out at some point. Well, it was birth and separation from parents in this chronology. By this book is actually a pretty decent biography. The more recent one, the original biography was by Cooley, who was a Timothy Mather Cooley, which was printed in 1838. And Wink, you were familiar with that
1836,
book.
December.
And so shortly after his death, but then nothing had, and this is part of the story that Jen, you were alluding to, and you guys talk about in your book, where a lot of attention wasn't given to that character, and that was the case with Haynes, Reverend Haynes, because for 100 years or more, nothing was really singled out about him until there was a finding in some review papers of his work on anti-slavery. In fact, at the time of the revolution or shortly thereafter, he was writing. I think it was before then. So that kind of created a wave. And so the major biography that I'm looking at of all these dates and everything, and Wikipedia has it as well, but I've spoken to the author, is Black Puritan, Black Republican, by John Salient. I don't know if you guys have come across that, The Life and Thought of Lemuel Haynes. John Salient, I just refreshed my memory. He is an SEA scholar, which I had written down SEA, which is, I think, early American scholar, a scholar of early American history, and he's a professor at Western Michigan. And he's done an outstanding job. That was published in 2003. So this is a really full overview, and he gets into really deep material about Haynes. And so when I contacted him, I said, "Had you ever done anything about the family?" Because I'm doing all this genealogy stuff. He said, "Well, no, not yet, but with the 250-year anniversary of the American Revolution coming up, it might be on his plate." So there are a lot of publications coming out around the Revolution. But to get back to the original point about who was Lemuel Haynes, he was orphaned and given over to left at the Haynes farm. They don't know if it was the famous Haynes of Massachusetts, but then it was given to a deacon of a church And tell me his name again. Let's see. It was
Deacon David Rose.
David Rose. Yeah,
And
and
this
his
was
wife.
this was at the age of 4 months when he was
Yeah,
set off. Yeah.
and so
Although 5 months according to Timothy Mather, but who
Oh,
knows?
thank you. Thank you.
so in Cooley's book, he talks about. I mean, he just gets into the background of the history. But each of these books that I've been seeing, there's really good background of this history. But the Cooley book quotes Haynes in his own words. He says, this is Haynes's words about himself. When I was 5 months old, I was carried to Granville, Massachusetts, and bound out as a servant to Deacon David Rose till I was 21. He was a man of singular piety. I was taught the principles of religion. His wife, and he refers to it, my mistress, had peculiar attachment to me. She treated me as though I was her own child. I remember it was a saying among the neighbors that she loved Lemuel more than her own children. So very strong support. And
Yeah.
of course, in a religious family, and Deacon Rose, there's a good details about him, and his wife, David Rose's wife, died during Lemuel's childhood, so he spent even a closer amount of time with Deacon, but obviously he was very well loved by his foster mother, or whatever you want to call her. And so then the description is that there's stories about him growing up, and some great stories in here. Here's one of them. When he was a small boy, he experienced a dreadful alarm in a thunderstorm, and which made an impression that was never effaced. Is that how you pronounce it? Effaced? Yeah, I haven't used that word. Um, and then another story about uh, he'd gone to the river and he was drowning. So you might remember the, remarkable stories that made this impression on him. But all along, he's developed this and put it in the perspective of a religious devotion to God. And Cooley says this narrow. Oh no, these are. Oh no, Cooley's words. This narrow escape from a watery grave he'll often alluded to, even in the pulpit, as illustrating the special and merciful care of divine providence towards himself in that dangerous season of life. Those who observe, and these are Haynes's words, those who observe providences shall have providences to observe. A lot of providences to observe. And then the final story about kind of this, how he was looked after by God, is that he went out to drive a young ox to slaughter, and he was passing through the forest. The ox determined to return, and he's gored by him, sharp horns that inflicted several wounds on his face and head. And someone came along, diverted to the ox's attention, and again he quotes that, and Cooley says this: he was a firm believer in a special providence, and often expresses belief by quoting a favorite passage from John Newton. Did I not believe in the particular providence of God, I should not dare to step my foot out of doors. So it's a great, and Wink, I think you've read this book a while back, or whenever, I don't know. I've just recently kind of dug into it as, you and I connected, and that's a
Right.
whole different story too. But there's other things that I'll bring out in that book.
Oh yeah, some of the takeaways for me, Bill, were I'll just list three. There's so many. Takeaway number one, he literally taught himself to read in the Bible by the fireplace light of the chimney. To me, that's just, you think about that. This is a guy who is an orphaned, Uh, he's been forsaken by his natural parents. He's an indentured servant. He's working all the time as an indentured servant. And yet he divined an idea that he would always know more in the evening than he knew in the morning. That was his system of self-discipline. And he committed himself to reading by the fireplace light in the corner. Uh, People who knew him say that he had an instinctive facility for acquisition of knowledge. He had a masterful memory. He had a strong sense of character. Uh, the, the idea, and one of the ideas I like, another takeaway is that people remembered him as someone who rose above color caste in his lifetime. There was an article in the colored American newspaper, 1831, I think, in which they um, remembered and praised Reverend Haynes as someone who proved that he was one person for whom he had surpassed color caste system by perseverance. And I just thought that was just an amazing statement because, as we all know, the 1750s and the 1770s and the 1810s and 1820s were not the most progressive times in terms of race. They were not the most liberal times. I mean, there was slavery in many of the colonies and states. And yet here was a gentleman who taught himself the Bible. One another takeaway story. He was so proficient that one day with Deacon Rose at the house, they had a habit of reading sermons on the family. And one day he decided, well, he's going to write his own thoughts. He's going to create a sermon. And so he read the sermon he had created, but he didn't deign to let them know who had created it. So Deacon Rose is like, well, Lemuel, who wrote that esteemed piece of work? Be this esteemed scholar, or that noteworthy theologian, or this magnificent philosopher wrote that sermon. And then Haynes confessed, I wrote that sermon. And from that point on, he was on a nonstop trajectory towards history. And the deacon and all of the congregational ministers in that area rallied around him because they saw pure genius in this guy, regardless of his background or his color. And they supported him, wanted him to go to college. And so those are just a few takeaways, but I just think his life is such a tremendous story of the power of perseverance, even during the darkest of racial times in our history. What do you think, Bill?
Hey, I tell you, I have with each thing I read, and especially as it gets on, I mean, you
Yeah,
described his development of his preaching abilities, is synthesizing verses and translating that into things that people can use in their everyday life, and try to one. I mean, he was not just the preacher that got up in the pulpit and just did the hail and brimstone at all. I don't think he was a very. I wanted to give him three letters of kind of recognition, and one of them I keep forgetting what, but I compelling and clear and yet compassionate. So you can. I mean, I think he had a practical way about him. If you're in Vermont, which is where 20 years of his ministry was,
right.
um, he's dealing with farmers that primarily, right, that are looking to get some clarity on moral values,
Yes.
and is the crop going to make it this year, and you can see how I would imagine he'd have a lot of references to the plagues and the storms that happened throughout
Right.
all the Old Testament, but yet the defining thing that's got people really excited about him is this discovery back in 1983, I think it was,
Mhm.
of his Liberty Further Extended, the
Yes,
piece I
yes,
sent you all
right,
earlier.
right.
Um, so there's a brief description that John Salient says that I'll just read. In Liberty Further Extended, Haynes criticized the Atlantic slave trade and American slavery with language and standards he drew from the Bible, abolitionist publications, and the Republican thought of the Revolutionary years. So, and this is another woman and Vermonter, if that's what they're called. And Tom, I want to ask you again for a little clarification. Didn't your grandmother, or your grandfather rather, didn't he have two sisters who one of them was in Vermont too, or no? Or
Yeah,
they had ski
yes.
resorts or something.
Sue was an avid skier on the Olympic skiing team, and as was her husband. And
Oh,
also,
soon.
Sue and Mary were both avid skiers. Mary's husband was Charlie Proctor, who was well known in Vermont skiing.
Oh, so
Uh,
it is Vermont.
the
Okay.
first, yeah,
You're going to Vermont again too.
well, I used to
I'll
spend
drive you.
I used to spend my summers at a camp that was named well ahead of its time, Gaysville, Vermont, and
Ah,
it was part of a school that my parents sent us to. I was raised in the Midwest, north of Chicago, and it was a school established by uh, two women, a lesbian couple, although that word didn't exist at that time, who had an adopted daughter. And most of the students in the school were Jewish or Quaker, and their parents had sent them there to get out of the prejudice that they encountered in the cities north of Chicago at the time. I was neither Jewish or Quaker, but my parents felt that their children would go, thrive much better at a school like this. It was a farm school, so we had regular duties on the farm, and it was a school that was interesting in that they didn't advocate, but we were exposed to different cultures and ideas. One of the teachers at the time that Japanese were being interred was from Japan. They would bring kids out from Chicago, African American kids out to Chicago to play with us in the forest preserves around the school, and so it gave us a very good background. They had a summer camp in Vermont that we went
Oh
to
my
as
God.
well.
oh, Tom, I think that's a wonderful segue. I know that Jennifer had a question about the family, the connection to this famous reverend in Black American history and the family's sense of self. Am I right, Jen?
What I'm really curious about is when did this family transition from being a Black family into a white family? Can you pinpoint that in time? Was there a specific transition?
And there's in one of the books here that it was um, the black family identity is um, is a kind of not I don't know that Lemuel is quoted ever speaking about his black identity. That's what was said. So, but yet it's very well known that he is, and a lot of the older books or older quotes are mulatto. That was a term that was used, but of course there are a lot of derogatory, very the bad words that we associate with racial epithets were used, and so so the family, I guess, and there's just not a whole lot that's been written about the family, but it seemed as though our at least the family that we're trying to track down, his youngest son was, and he was a twin son, was William Babbitt Haynes,
An
and
important
that's how.
figure of himself, an important figure,
What's that? Yeah,
an important person.
and that's how I found Wink, because here I did another Google search because I wanted, okay, I know I've got a lot of handle material on Lemuel, and as I get more time to look at it all, that's great. But I actually need to get into William Babbitt Haynes because I'm trying to figure out what life he had, because he's our next in line to Lemuel, and William was the youngest of, I think, 11 children or something like
I
that. They
remember that.
lost one. And
Yeah,
his twin brother, Samuel, they were both born in 1803. And uh, they were born, where were they born?
Rutland,
I've
Vermont.
got, what's that?
Rutland, Vermont.
Yeah. Okay. They were yeah, because he was the pastor at
That's
the
right.
church in Rutland, West Rutland, because there were two Rutland
Yes.
churches, and he got the West Rutland. But William Babbitt, and his wife, they married in 1835, and William was born in 1803, and his wife was born in 1819. 1814. So that she was 21 when they married, and he was 32. So that's what we are exploring now. And now there's some other lines to look at, and you look at the family search tool and you can see all the different ones. But that line of our line, William Babbitt Haynes, um, it, it broke when William Babbitt Haynes died, and he
Right.
died at sea at the age of it was 1840, and so
Bill will laugh. I believe the conspiracy.
or 1839.
I
So and someone changed the date on Family Search, and I'm wondering, so who's got the information? Well, the good news is that I see that someone in Rutland, Vermont, has on their Find a Grave uh, posting is someone who's followed our family line. So,
oh good.
Jen, to answer your question, it seems that the family took on after he died, when his wife remarried, is the time when the white uh she married a white a guy who was several years younger than she, by the name of James Madison Whipple. He was born in 1819, living in New York, Troy, New York, or that's where he was born. um, and so exactly where they met and all that, we don't know, but it was a couple. I've read in some family notes that it was a couple years after William Babbitt Haynes died at sea, and there's like no records that I've been able to find so far. I haven't scoured the earth for them yet, but I'm that's I had a distant relative actually on the Whipple side. I can't really say Whipple is my relative because bloodline, I'm Haynes, as is Tom. But the Whipple name took on meaning for us, and I was going down that track, and this one Whipple I met is actually, he's the father of the governor's wife in Minnesota. My wife and I met them. They hosted us in their house as I was doing this genealogy thing this summer, and he said to me finally, I think on a phone call, he said, genealogy, some people have said that it's like a disease. So it kind of takes over, but it's
Right.
a good disease. It's a good disease.
It is. It is. I want to jump in just a little bit because I do find William Babbitt Haynes to be fascinating for several reasons, and then Jen might jump on on my comment. Number one, I think he's fascinating because he was a twin. He was a twin. His twin was Samuel Haynes, and his twin became a doctor in upstate New York. And if I remember correctly, according to the US Census records, his twin brother remained black. And so I suspect there's a line of the Haynes family through the twin Samuel that may still consider themselves black to this day. I don't know, but that's a fascinating takeaway. Number two, William Babbitt Haynes was clearly understood to be a black person. Why do I know this? There was some account at Middlebury College, because William Babbitt Haynes went to Middlebury College for a short period of time, didn't graduate. But he was referred to in this account as the son of a Negro preacher. So it was understood when he was at Middlebury College that William Babbitt Haynes was the son of a Negro preacher. So they're kind of telling you this is what you are. But number three, and Jen and I were discussing this before we started the podcast, could we make history today, gentlemen? Here's my point. In footnote 70 of that famous book by Timothy Mather Cooley, he refers to William Babbitt Haynes as, and I quote more or less, a law clerk in a law office in Massachusetts. Bill has seen the footnote. Famous footnote for this family. Why? That footnote confirms that William Babbitt Haynes was the very first black law clerk in American history. All right. And actually, I've used that as a creative device in a novel that I wrote about the first black lawyer, which Bill might be aware of.
That's how I found you, right?
Yeah, that's right. More importantly, I read the wonderful notes that Catherine Jacobs had put together. And if you read Catherine
was actually
Jacobs'
her brother.
notes,
Yeah, her brother.
Okay.
It
Those
was written for
handwritten
her.
notes say the William Haynes was a lawyer in Massachusetts. Now, when I first saw footnote 70, I immediately reached out to the Massachusetts State Bar to see if I could confirm confirmation that he was admitted to the Massachusetts Bar. They didn't have documentation to confirm that. However, if we were to credit this statement, then we would have to rewrite the history books because William Babbitt Haynes, your ancestor, would be the very first black lawyer in American history. And we would have to rewrite many history books and studies. What do you think about that?
I think since Tom is a lawyer, you're a lawyer. I have a daughter who's a lawyer. Jen may be a lawyer. I think we should embrace this.
So wait,
I could add something. One quick note on that, and I'll just throw it out there for you, Wink and Jen and Tom. In the family search page on William Babbitt Haynes, you can find, as you guys pointed out to me, it's been a great research tool for yourselves. There's a document that shows William Babbitt Haynes, and his middle name is for his mother, being sent in quotes on the passenger list for the brig Cyene with Cyene, I think, from Cardiff, Wales. And I can show that to you if you want me to share my screen, but it shows him being sent by the U.S. Consul to Boston in 1838. So why would a U.S. Consul, Consul, from Wales, or I was looking on, I don't know if we had I think we probably had an embassy there at one point. Why would he be sent? Well, on that particular date that he came back on the ship, a week later, there was a huge rally in Cardiff, Wales, celebrating the final act of freedom of slave trade, transatlantic slave trade. I think there's some dates if you look at the between it started in 1835, but there was like a grace period of 3 years, and there was this huge celebration. Was that why he was sent back, or was it because he was being employed by the U.S. government? It's not clear, but the his name, I mean his occupation listed on the ship docket is as a mariner. Okay, so mariner seems to me is like you're actually a working person on a ship.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But I think that you know, if Wink wants to do a follow up on his Götterdämmerung piece, he could also look to incorporate some intrigue there too, because he might very well have been, as you were pointing out, the already a lawyer working in some capacity for either himself. I think he was, if he was married in 35 and his first children, our line, the very first child they have is uh, William J. Haynes, who becomes William J. Whipple. And I think there's a little discrepancy on the dates, because on the 1850 census, he shows up as 14, which means he's 1836, and they were married the year before. That usually happens, right? Or happens often
Right.
a year later.
Right.
But on his tombstone that I visited in Winona, Minnesota, which is how I got over to really cool area in western Minnesota, where they have the pipe stone where the Native Americans carved their pipes. But um, I saw on his tombstone it says 1839. Other places report say 18. So this gets more to Jen's question about what's being done to uh, honor the Black heritage, or to totally disavow it.
Mm. Right. Well, let me, Wink, I wanted to go back to something that you said, but related to what you've been saying, Bill. Did I understand you correctly to say that Samuel, the doctor, I heard you say was he was the one who kind of went to the white side, and it was William Babbitt Haynes who
I think Wink said the opposite, that
the
Samuel went as a doctor. Yeah, as a doctor.
Okay.
And that's there is, by the way, on that, I have connected with a relative of Samuel, and as to, and there's some great photographs where the more of that line of where there, and also an the similarities, like the picture I sent you of our relative William
Yes.
J. Haynes Whipple. They're very common features among that generation and older. And so in this woman's line, she said, "Oh, we didn't even know that Samuel had a brother." So I think they're at a very early stage, and I'm not
Oh,
sure if they know about the Haynes connection. So I
that's
sent them the
interesting.
link with all the pictures of the
Right.
Haynes family and those connections. So, it takes time for people to get there.
well,
True. True.
I'm wondering, like, Wink, it sounds to me, the more research that you do, Bill and Tom, you might find, much like the Twymans, that there is like a white Twyman side and a black Twyman side. You might also find the same with the Haynes.
And I agree, and I think I've told Wink about this, but for all of you, I just finished reading this piece that is a similar story about a very famous uh, black mixed person in American history, called Benjamin Banneker and Us, by Rachel Webster. She just I heard her at the Tom like this at the Winnetka bookstall. That's a old line bookstore in the town that we went to high school in, and met her on a whim, because I was going to attend my classmates' presentation, who's also in the Hall of Fame with you, Tom, at our alumni school, New Trier. Cliff Sloan, that just finished a book about the Supreme Court during World War II. And when I looked up what was going on in the bookstall, I see Benjamin Banneker and Us, 11 generations of an American family. And she is a really gifted writer that I know I'm hoping you guys connect with her, because I think she'd be phenomenal on your podcast.
Yeah. Yeah.
So going to this though, I'm sorry, we're going to interrupt, but one of the things that Wink and I have a kind of a debate about in our book, it was really our biggest point of contention, is Wink brought up this idea of, can we just see ourselves as old Americans? Like, can we, not black, not white, old Americans, black history, white history, it's our history, we're old Americans. And I responded to him, I like the idea, but I was like, I don't think that's where we're at right now in our national dialogue and in our national conversation. I just feel that there's so much right now that's become divisive that people don't want to see ourselves in each other. So, and he pushed back on that quite a bit. Bill, it sounds like you've read the book, so maybe you saw that kind of debate that we have there. But how do you feel about now knowing your history and your ancestry and the Haynes family? How do you feel about us seeing each other as old Americans? Is that possible? And is that a solution to some of the division, the racial division that we're seeing, kind of spring back up into life lately?
First of all, I've read the first 8 letters. You guys, and Rachel does the same in her. She has letters going between herself and her relatives. It's a really great way to communicate. Yours is much more unique, and I think, I don't know if the word's incisive, but it's like really, really, you guys are bringing out the great issues, and I can't wait to get to it next. I'm going to finish in that. I'll do my Amazon book review, because I think I bought it through Amazon.
Well,
and throw it out there. It's awesome. It's awesome. And I wouldn't want to defer a little bit to Tom in one sense, because Tom, the first thing I think I saw about Tom was, his work with other cultures, and especially, in immigration law, and yet he's got several nonprofits that he's involved in. Just a tremendous, you know, kind of activity that, is really the essence of how an active role in making progress can help. So I'll leave it at that.
As Mark Twain said, travel kills prejudice, and life experience. And one of the wonderful things about Skip Gates' program is that you see how we're all interconnected.
Yeah.
And
Right.
I wish, I think if everybody watched Skip Gates, the attitude would change somewhat, hopefully.
Yeah.
But it's an ongoing struggle. And as you say, that we're in a terrible situation, divisiveness, which is totally unnecessary. But that's life, and that's what we have to deal with.
Maybe Skip Gates will have you two on his show.
Yeah. Well, I think, where I came from, it's interesting. I love the Mark Twain quote. I came into this discussion, my background is I was a China scholar. So I came into this discussion, and that was, I felt like, did I miss a memo somewhere? Yeah, I came back to the United States and I saw where we were really, our national identity, if you will, was fraying around around racial lines. And as someone who lived overseas and always, being in a room with someone who usually looked different, talked different, etc., that's where I was like, why? How is this possible? And I think that's partly why we also started to write too, is because these conversations aren't really being had, or if they are being had, they're being had, behind the scenes. And we wanted to bring out this conversation and make it, normalize it, where we could have these conversations across different.
And I think more people will. The question I asked Rachel at the book meeting, her book presentation was, what are your statistics in the book, or are there statistics? And she does have statistics about how many, what percentage of the society was Black, and what percentage, in her neck of the woods, which was Maryland and Virginia, same as you, Wink. But in Haynes's arena, is a very small percentage of Blacks in Vermont. But on the other hand, the statistics I didn't know, in Rhode Island and along all the shipping areas, there was a very high percentage of Black, people that were intermixing, no doubt, with whites and with others. So I think there's more, and this is what I was trying to get at. There's more people like Tom and myself that have this background of a genetic link. And so just knowing the link, that you have the link, makes one become more empathetic if there's any, kind of racial divide. I think that's part of it. Let's say you're as white as the Casper the Ghost, or whatever analogy you want to use. How are other people, or even people that are resisting or don't, like, back to Jen's point, well, when did the family become white? Because I never heard about this. I've asked another relative who's 95. I never heard of that. And so I think the obvious reason was that there was a lot of racial tension, and merits, that the plums that were being given were not to people who identified with a Black background, right? I mean, if you want to put it in simple words. So, Jen, I think you guys are really onto something here with this. I do want to say one other thing about, there's another author I just came across in. Wrote a book about the Vermont farmers. I'm trying to see my note. Vermont Black farmers, and she's from Vermont. And what she's trying to do is say, and I think you guys have talked about it probably before, is how do you get the knowledge out there that there was a more active Black population, and that Blacks were here a lot longer sometimes than people think, and they were active, and they were farming, and they're just like you and me, right? That's what really this is all about. Is that what you mean by old Americans? Is that, because I haven't gotten to that part of the book?
Wink,
I
you
think
should.
so.
Yeah.
I think the idea is that if we look at our full selves, we're all the products of everyone that made us possible. So, for example, you might think of yourself only as a Black American, but probably many more tributaries that flow into your past that made you possible. And similarly, if you happen to be Bill or Tom, uh, you are a product of many ancestors, including some who happen to have been regarded as Black in their day. And you two are very fortunate, because not only do you happen to know of your Black ancestor, but your Black ancestor made the history books. People wrote a book about your ancestor, and that's a very unique and uncommon place